Reunion 2001, and we have just finished up a delicious breakfast, and right now we've decided that we're going to take this opportunity to go back to the old days. And with us we have Aunt Marie, and we have her grandnephew Joel Hafner, and we're going to discuss her memories of Pearl Harbor. And I found out from Aunt Marie that when she was there and when this happened, that she was only 23 years old. And tell us more about what it was like, Aunt Marie.
Well, especially since the recent film of Pearl Harbor has been out, my grandchildren and others have shown an interest in talking to somebody who's still living that was there in 1941. And the film, I did see the film. And
you said you liked it.
I found the film, naturally some of it had to be simulated, but the overall impact of the film depicted the chaos and the emotion and the trauma that people went through very well. I really enjoyed the film. And it really brought back memories. And I had my grandchildren begin to say, Grandma, they saw the film, they said, Grandma, you better put this on tape so we can have it to, they really hadn't given it much thought until they saw the film. Then it began to be meaningful. So, okay, I was 23 years old.
And you told me.
In 1941, and about, I don't remember, January or February of 1941, was there, of course, for about 11 months before Pearl Harbor. I'll begin I'm going to tell it as it affected me. Tell it from a personal point of view. People can read the history of Pearl Harbor and see the pictures in books. So I'm going to tell my experience of Pearl Harbor, and we had a fantastic time during those months. Were happy days for us. We had a lot of fun and we didn't have much money, but we found we didn't really need a lot of money because there were so many things to do at Pearl Harbor and in Honolulu that we just could have fun. When previous to the bombing of Pearl Harbor, there have been a lot of air activity, a lot of maneuvers going on both at sea and in the air. And my husband, Ted, was gone a lot at sea, and maneuvers would come in. As we all know, at the time of Pearl Harbor, the fleet was in for the weekend. And of course, that meant that everybody that was possible could be ashore. And my husband came home, Ted came home on Friday evening. Saturday was a beautiful day, and actually Saturday evening we were on Diamond Head, watched the most glorious sunset that I had ever seen in the months that I had been there. It was a gorgeous sunset. Having stayed there and watched the sunset, we then went downtown Honolulu and did our Christmas shopping because you had to do your shopping in order to get gifts back stateside and get them sent early. So we went shopping downtown, came back to our apartment. We lived just 4 short blocks off of Waikiki Beach. And we were in an apartment complex. There were 3 apartments fairly close together, with outside stairways going up to our 2nd-story apartment with little porches, little small porches, and an outside stairway. And this will be significant as I tell you what happened. So we'd gotten home, put our bathing suits on after shopping. It was getting late, towards 11 o'clock or so, and we did what we often did, was go swimming behind the Royal Hawaiian Hotel while the dancing and the dance music was floating from the Royal Hawaiian. We were out in the ocean, just having a great time. So we swam around there listening to the music. And then it was about time to go home. And shortly after midnight, we went home, and a friend of mine, a girlfriend of mine, that had gone out on the ship when I had gone, by the way, that was the days of the Matson lines, when they had the Merlin and the Mariposa.
Yes.
I don't remember which one I went out in, but I went out in one, came back in the other. But
Sorry about, I have to apologize for the interruption, but we're going to continue now. And before we continue, over here, and he's joined the group and is going to listen to this interesting tale about Pearl Harbor. Now, Aunt Marie, where were you?
okay, I think it's already been recorded. I got as far as after the swimming party, and we got home after midnight. We sat up until 2:30 playing crossword, working on crossword puzzles with a friend of mine who lived a couple of doors away. And so it was about 2:30 when we went to bed, and I mentioned that there were a lot of air activity going on, and had been for some time. That the noise of the bombing did not at first awaken us, and by the time we got to bed, about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, we were sleeping in. And finally, I had gotten up to go to the bathroom, and this is why I mentioned the outside stairway, because it was a small apartment, and we went to the kitchen. The bathroom was off from the kitchen and also near the back door, or the only door. And as I looked out the window, I saw of the door, I saw the apartment next door, which was just a few yards away. People were standing on the porch across the way, and I saw terror in their faces, and I thought, the building must be on fire. And I opened the door and said, "What's the matter?" And they said, "Pearl Harbor's being bombed. Turn your radio on." And I just had a hard time reacting to that, but as I looked off to the left toward Pearl Harbor itself, there were the planes with the big sun on the side, and I could see the plane. I could also see the picture of the rising sun. And so I dashed in. Ted was still asleep, and I called and awakened him. They said, "Turn your radio on." And so I turned the radio on, and I think that probably was most disconcerting to me, because when you turn a radio on, you expect normal type of announcing, but their voices were shaking, and the announcers were having a hard time getting out their messages, and what they were doing was giving orders for the servicemen where to go, those who were home, and where to go for being picked up, so that there wouldn't be too many cars driving out to the base. So we living just about 4 very short blocks off from the beach in Calico Avenue, the main boulevard out along the beach. Instructions were given for Ted to get down to that boulevard, and buses would pick them up. Well, when he woke up, Ted thought perhaps he couldn't conceive of the Japanese being there, and he thought maybe the Russians had sent submarines in. So I said, "Well, you better have some breakfast." He said, "Well, fix some breakfast. I'll try." I don't think he even knew he ate breakfast. I fixed some toast. What I remember about that incident and those moments of utter, we were just actually in such sort of stunned shock that we couldn't comprehend what was going on. And I fixed his breakfast, and while he dressed, and they wore these starched white uniforms. So as he put his leg into the pant leg, a button popped off. What I remember about while he was eating breakfast, I was trying to sew that button on, and my hand was shaking so I could hardly find the hole to put the needle through. I had a struggle getting that on. And so he finished, jumped into his uniform, knew his instructions. He started out those steps, I stood on the porch, and he gave, we embraced a goodbye, and he went down the stairway to the bottom, and he looked back, and we knew that we may never see each other again.
Oh my.
There was just that awareness when he left that he might not be back. And so he ran back upstairs again, and we embraced and he gave me a kiss again, and he left. He didn't turn back, and he left, and he was gone. I'll just say this about, at this point, about Ted. The wives, there were probably about 20-some wives that were there. Most of them servicemen wives, but some were civilian workers that were stationed there and working on the base. All the men had been called out, so there were just we women left. And during the following week, most of them, but 2 of us, had heard from our husbands by the following Friday. I did not know whether Ted was dead or alive until the following Friday. Now, going back to our experience after he left, I ran across to my girlfriend, and she was showering, and I told her, I said, Jeanette, called her out of the shower, and she was singing away, having a great time, and I said, Jeanette, Pearl Harbor's being bombed. She laughed at me. She couldn't believe it. And I said, yes, Pearl Harbor's being bombed. Then she became aware of the sound. So she jumped into her clothes, and though the announcers had said, all civilians stay out of sight, don't anybody be seen on the street, don't go out of your home. Well, Jeanette and I couldn't stand it, so because we were too far back from the beach. So we decided, we crept along under the shrubbery and trees, keeping close to the houses as we went down to Waikiki Beach. We got down there and kind of tucked ourselves back in under the awnings and eaves of the stores and whatever shops were there, and kept ourselves out of sight. What we saw, I have to say, we were so numb that you saw this and you experienced it, but it was surreal. It just was beyond our emotions catching up with it. And so we stood there, and I think the thing that was so frightening was to see ships from the right, which would be Pearl Harbor, to Diamond Head. All of that view and that scenery, ships were at sea, and they were just, especially the destroyers, were zigzagging and zigzagging. It seemed like everything out there was also chaotic because the ships were trying to keep from being, they had these suicide, submarines, one-man submarines, and they were, actually those submarines had been at the mouth of the bay, wanting, when the locks would open, to let ships in or out. They would hug underneath the ship, get into the bay to blow the ship up inside the bay. And that's the way they hoped to get in. But they also were on the waters all around the Oahu Island. And we didn't know how many, we didn't know what, but that's why the ships were zigzagging, was so that a submarine couldn't connect up under it and blow the ship up. So we stood there, and by the time, remember there were 2 waves of planes that came in. You'll read about 2 waves coming in. They were actually prepared for 3 waves of ships to come in, and we'll talk about that in a minute. 2 had come in. By the time I got down there were still bombing and still strafing, trying to catch ships that had gotten out of the mouth of the harbor and were at sea. And we watched them drop the bomb and hoping that it wouldn't hit the ship, and we'd see that it would hit the water and splash up. And well, it was, as I say, surreal. Pretty soon the bombing stopped, and we went back to our apartment. from there, the women just were unable to, none of us stayed alone. I actually didn't undress and go to bed for at least almost, it was towards the weekend before any of us actually undressed and went to bed, because we stayed in groups in several apartments. We'd have several women would stay together. Someone would stay awake and be awake, and others would sleep, and we'd lie down and rest. And then we'd get up and they would rest. And we went that way for several days, keeping, of course, by then you had to have blackout. Martial law was declared, and we had to have our windows blacked out, and be very careful of lights, be very careful of being visible. The experience of that week that I recall was the fact that we lived with the consciousness that there had been utter devastation at Pearl Harbor, and so we expected the Japanese to follow up. No one had any idea that the Japanese would invade the island. We lived for days under that expectation. Also, there was alert for, and they kept, of course, listening then for incoming planes in case there was another attack. So actually, for some weeks, especially the first week, we lived with tension of not knowing whether there would be an uprising of the Japanese on the island, how many of them knew this was going to happen, would they join with the other Japanese, would they not. There was a lot of rumors running around, of course, at a time like that. It was kind of hard to sift fact from rumors. But through that week, I lost about 20 pounds that week. I mean, we just were under such tension because of anticipation of the island being invaded by the Japanese. We didn't know how it happened. We didn't know how they'd accomplish this. We didn't know how many ships were out there. And so we just lived with that expectation. Finally, on the following Friday night, Ted got to come home, and just for a few hours, and let their wives know that they were okay. And as he tells his experience, when he got to the base, out to Pearl Harbor, his ship was already gone. He was stationed on the USS Henley, and that ship had gotten out of the bay and was at sea. So he was put on another destroyer, and since he was in the engineer, down in the engineer room, was his station, he was also there. But he just took over as he would on his own ship. But when he got aboard ship, he was under a lot of trauma because there were two bodies of servicemen who'd been severed by shrapnel, and their bodies were just there. And so you can imagine, and I'm describing only what I know of one person's experience, because for weeks, I probably saw him maybe on 3 other occasions after he come home at Pearl Harbor. Probably about 3 times when he came in, we'd be home for a short time. And he still, because at sea, they would be, his destroyer would be out, they would be escorting larger ships. There was troop escorts, and the destroyers were used for escorts. They had 4 hours on and 4 hours off, and they lived with tension because, as you know from history, we kept losing ships. Finally, he left. I then went to work for a short time at the base in an office that windows looked out right onto the Arizona. And I got a job working in an office. I sat next to a young man who sat at the next desk near me, and he himself had been at Pearl Harbor when this happened, and the day following, and he pulled bodies out of the bay, burned bodies, because the burning oil, the oil that had escaped the ships as they were bombed, the bay was just floating with oil, and that caught fire. So the whole bay would be ablaze. At that time, the servicemen had not been taught how to swim under burning oil, which they certainly soon taught them how to do to try and, be able to get to safety and stay alive. But we lost hundreds of men that were burned in that burning oil, in the water, trying to get out to safety. And this young fellow had pulled these dead bodies out all day long, and he said, I can never forget this smell of burning flesh, and I never could touch a piece of meat again as long as I live. But anyway, be that as it may, we kept hearing these stories of things that had happened out there. Of course, and I'm not going to mention the things that you could read in your history books, you can see in your pictures, so much as how it affected those of us who, in our personal lives, Ted was finally sent on every mission that the ships went on. You had no idea where they were going or how long they'd be gone, because every captain of each ship would have secret orders. So the men didn't know when they left. But anyway, he left. I had thought he would be back in April on Easter weekend. It's when I anticipated Ted to be back. He had been gone about 3 weeks. And I had put in for transportation back, either civilian transportation or military transportation. Whichever came first, I was going to take it and come home. Well, I got a call on just before Easter, April. That would be 3 months after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And I had gotten a call to be aboard the ship, which then had become transports. They had transported men from the coast and back and forth. And so I was called to go aboard ship on the weekend. I had to leave everything as it was in the apartment. You had to be out there, and they didn't give you much time. Pack your things and go. We didn't know when we got aboard ship how long we would be there in the bay before the ship would go off, because it too was under secret orders. Because the danger for so many miles out of submarines, these one-man suicide submarines, they would wait for secret orders, and then the ship could get out. And they also had done that along the west coast as well. I found out when we got home, they were also escorted in from San Francisco is where I came in. So when I got aboard ship, I kept hoping, left a message. I was aboard ship and was hoping I'd hear from him before I left. But it so happened that Ted did not come back for 3.5 years. During that 3.5 years, he went to Samoa to accompany a hospital ship, but when he got there, then he was involved in the destroyer activities around the various islands that the Japanese were invading, Wake Island and others. So he spent 1.5 years at sea during those missions around the South Sea Islands, and then was put ashore in Australia for R&R, rest and recreation, and wives could not go there, so it was actually 3.5 years from the time I saw him before he came back to the United States. During that time, his ship the USS Henley had been destroyed, was the name of the ship he was on, somewhere along the line, but he had not been on it at the time the ship went down. I suppose I don't know whether you have any questions more about the island itself or the bombing itself, what took place there. It was, all I can say, it was very chaotic, very tense, very anxious. There were, again, several alerts, alarms of invading planes coming in. And they would do this because took a while to determine whether they were friendly planes or whether they were not. And at one time when he was in, I drove him out to the base, and I don't remember if that was the second or third time that he had been home for the weekend. And I drove him out to the base, got alongside of the dock where his ship was docked, and the Pearl Harbor base went into alert again, and he had to just literally took me and threw me into that. There was right along the base where the supply buildings, corrugated buildings where they had supplies and military ammunition, supplies, and everything to be loaded aboard ship. He threw me in there, and he said, "Marie, stay out of sight." And he had to go aboard ship, and I stood there and watched that destroyer go into military action. I mean, the guns went up, everybody took their station, and everything was prepared for action should there be a real thing happening. And I don't remember. Actually, those are times when you're sort of numb with terror that you don't really record maybe all the facts that you actually saw and heard. Finally, the all clear signal went out, called the all clear signal came, so I could get in the car and drive home. Don't ask me how I did that. I don't really remember. But that was the tension until I left. When I left and got aboard the Mariposa, I had gone out in a lovely, the Matson Airlines were the great ships that went from the west coast to Australia, stopping by islands on the way. And they were great ships. I can remember I had gone down to the Samoan Islands, and about 3 years before that was down in Samoa, Pago for 15 months, came back, and we were back a few months before we went back to Honolulu. So I had been on those Matson lines, and they were great memories of those trips. But when I went back this time, those cabins now, instead of having 3 bunks, had 12, up to 10 and 12. They were stacked one atop the other. You kept your life jackets on at all times, and I guess we must have taken off when we lay down in bed. We had to have them right there by us anyway, and never be around without them. But we were packed in those just as servicemen would be as they were transported. And I just remember it was a very tense time coming across, very uncertain time, and found the same escorts, meeting escorts coming into San Francisco. And I remember coming under the Golden Gate Bridge and finally getting in and docking, and the family meeting me there. So if there are any other questions you have about Pearl Harbor.
What were your feelings on the Japanese internment?
My feelings about them, I can see why they did it, but I think there was a lot of unfairness about it. But I suppose that would have been very difficult to determine, given the fact that the ambassadors from Japan were actually negotiating peace, knowing full well that Pearl Harbor was going to be bombed. So you had no confidence. You had there was nothing that you felt you could trust. And getting back to the third invasion, then afterwards learned that they were prepared to make a third um, uh, attack on Pearl Harbor at the time, but when they realized that the airplane carriers were at sea and they weren't able to destroy those, which that was what they wanted, was catch those ships that were at sea. That's when they said, when their commander, what was Hiroshima? Yeah, he had stated, he said, no, we won't invade because the surprise is over. And they had been awakened. Of course, that's when the famous statement was made. We've awakened a sleeping giant. So I would have a hard time. I met Japanese who were interned, and the unfairness, it was truly seemed very unfair to them, and the fact that there were many, probably you would say most of them were loyal Americans. And that was hard for them to take, but I also at the same time, given the dangers and the fact that they had been so deceived, I could see why it happened. But I felt sorry that it happened because it seemed very unfair to those who had been loyal and faithful American citizens.
All right, so did Midway take place just a few days after that?
I don't know how long. I couldn't recall how long. Probably on the books it would tell you, but I don't know. I don't think it was a few days.
It was more than that, right?
It was longer. Yeah, it wasn't just a few days.
Were you there when they went off to Midway?
But I even don't remember that. What I do remember was the problems. I really can't recall. It's been, what, 60 years ago? I can't remember the details of sequence.
Well, I have to tell you that you remember very well, and what a fantastic storyteller you are.
Well, it was something that I don't think it took, though I had seen pictures, I had seen, what was the film you had? Tora was a movie that they had made, and I had seen that. But somehow this latest film, Pearl Harbor, probably awakened emotions more accurately. And let's talk a bit about my reaction to the movie.
Yeah, the movie.
The movie naturally had to be simulated in lots of incidences. But again, they had actual footage, so those were real. What you will see in that movie is actually real. As far as the love story that follows through the film, which actually is, some people said, well, they didn't need to have that in there. Yes, they did, because everybody had a love story. Hundreds of people were involved in emotional relationships. And if any one of them had been told, it could have been told. This is simulated and told in the movie. So you have to realize what they'd done was to convey that it did affect personal drama in people's lives as it affected their emotional relationships with husbands that were killed and that sort of thing. But the film is interesting that it starts out with two young boys whose dad flew a plane and lived out in this big ranch, and he flew a plane, and these kids had built a simulated plane in a barn or a building somewhere, and they were just young kids, 10, 12, 14 years old, something like that, and they're simulating all this plane, and they formed a relationship, and it follows them to France, I think it was. They were in France for a while first.
Well, no, they were in, I forget where they were. They were just in some base.
Yeah, but they were overseas first.
Oh, yeah, then that one guy went over.
Yeah,
but he went over.
One of them decided to go to the
it was
Royal
either France
military
or Britain.
With England. And then they end up in Pearl Harbor, and they're there during the bombing. It's the story of their lives and their girlfriends and their wives. But anyway, as far as the picture itself, I would say the simulated part, the one fact that you'll see in the film that did not happen is that when in the film, when everything is chaotic, it's moving so fast that you really can't follow anything through. You know, how it's just all jammed in there together. I would say the fact is that it created the chaos that was there.
Yeah.
The fact that some of it wasn't actually true is, to me, immaterial, because they did have to simulate, and they created a picture, a film. But the impact of the chaos, yes, what you see in there, the emotion, the chaos, that's the way it was. But when those planes came in the film and came down or were down on flying between ships, no, the planes didn't come that down. They did come low, but they didn't.
They didn't come like actually like right above them.
No,
like that.
no.
So they were like a little bit higher.
They were higher, because if you, in checking your books on it, you'll find the different types of ships that were bombers that were used. There were different levels on which they would drop their bombs. A certain
Like
type of bombs were
bombers.
high, certain ones flew lower and did a different type of bombing and different type of attack. Those who lived, families that lived out at Chicken Field Base, where the airplane, of course you all know that we did everything wrong as far as our military preparedness was concerned. Everybody was ashore under tensions that we were under at the time. Everybody was, actually it was right. We were asleep. It was danger. There was enough evidence that we ought to have been more on the alert, and we weren't.
Do you think that caused an overreaction on a retaliation?
No, not an overreaction.
Do you think
I don't.
maybe the
I
bomb
think
or?
the reaction. I don't feel that the reaction was it was what it should be.
You felt
because
that it was
right.
justified?
Yeah, it just took us too long to wake up. I mean, the damage was done.
Right.
And at the air bases, there were 3 air bases, and at the air bases we had those ships just right like decks right in a row. So all they had to do was come down and wipe those out. Everything was made easy for them. Timing couldn't have been. Everybody was aboard ashore that could be ashore, just to maintain. I will mention also another thing that's very sad to me, that those men who were stationed there were at the military mess hall at breakfast time, and they knew it. And the Japanese knew the timing was right, and they bombed the mess hall, killing thousands, and men were running across the field away from that, and they'd strafe them right in the fields. They caught many of them just in open air, and they were just like, everything was just totally unprepared, and that was our fault for being unprepared. But one thing that is true is that when the American people, even if they got caught, we were caught sleeping. As far as being prepared and alert as we should have been in a state of war that we were with on the East Coast and in Europe, and knowing that the Japanese, we did know that they were prepared for military action, but they thought that they were headed for the southern islands, not for heading this way. As you know from your books, that was a military impossibility post.
Yeah.
That seemed impossible that they could transport that kind of a air force that far, and we know now how it happened.
Well,
but no one imagined it.
What'd you think about how, like, it showed Dan Aykroyd or whatever, he was keeping an eye on all the transmissions they were making to the embassies and stuff, and how they were decoding, and how he was saying, like, well, we can't even find their whole fleet, and like they weren't even gonna, they were like shooing him away, like they won't attack Pearl Harbor. What'd you feel about that?
That's what I'm saying. That's where the sleep came. People they were asleep. Mentally, they had no idea. We were too naive.
To even think that they would
We were too
attack.
naive to, it's true. And when we found out how it happened, that it's true that it took a lot of courage on their part and a lot of ingenuity to accomplish what they did, but we made it easy for them.
Can I get one
Dropped. That we dropped in response. How did that make you feel?
It was very sad, personally. These are my personal reactions. Sad but necessary.
Right.
Because had that not happened, too bad that has to be so many lives lost. But it saved so many.
That's
it put an end to a war, to an aggressive war.
That would have maybe cost more
That
lives.
would have cost much more. And I think I'm so proud, really, while I'm sorry that American people can be so naive as we were and be as unprepared we were, especially when there was such a state of war around in Europe, in the South Pacific, and in China, and Japan, and Taiwan, all those areas. There was the Philippines. All that tension had been going on. We should have been far more prepared. But on the other hand, once they woke up and the action, the American people showed a great strength the way they reacted. And I am so proud of the fact that MacArthur had the Christian heart enough to take over the Japanese and take control and treat them as he did. He treated them civilly. He treated them with kindness. He treated them with fairness. And we had, yes, it was sad to realize what we did. But I think that in the long run, had it not happened.
Save more lives.
Oh my, oh yes,
Right.
yeah. So
Well,
I think
I just, I read about this stuff, and when you get like your input, it's really interesting to talk to you. You get the other side of the story that you can't get through a textbook.
yes, that's right. You have to be careful what you get in textbooks sometimes because they're going to have everything's sort of a
Opinionated.
bias anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
But those are my reactions to what I saw, what I felt, and what I observed then as after the fact, after it's happened, and then read about it. At least those are my reactions. I feel sorry for the Japanese that were interned, but I do understand why.
Right.
And I understand that the state of affairs were such that you couldn't trust anybody. We trusted them once, and it was hard to trust again. And
I want to thank you, Aunt Marie, for this wonderful story. And
Great.
you were able to tell it as nobody else. We really, truly thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'm glad
Good,
we
thanks.
had this opportunity.
I'm so glad the boys are here to listen.
Yes,
because
the boys were, and they're interested. You can tell that they're history buffs.
I would like a copy.
Yeah,
My history
I'll make
teacher,
it on a CD.
because I took a history course this year.
Oh, good.
Yeah, advanced placement history.
Oh,
So we
okay.
kind of, we went into a lot of this.
Okay.
It was great.
Okay. All right. Now,
So
I'll put
thanks
this up
again.
there. Anybody want to take a look at it if they can? All right.
Over
I'm
and
happy
out.
to share it.
Okay.
And I'd really not given it any thought until my grandchildren began asking me, Grandma, you've got to put that on tape. So
And we did.
I'm glad I had the
We
chance
did
to do
it.
it, Loanne. Thank you so much for giving me that opportunity.
All right.
You can tell us what.
Tell us what?
Well, the fact that I was trying to get an interview with Aunt Marie.
Yeah, tell us more.
Well, just I wanted to,
You wanted to be on tape. You
just
get to talk
just
now.
to show who was doing the interviewing, and we'll probably never catch this moment again. And it's sort of special, so that's the only reason I wanted to do this. But that's all I wanted to say, and it's really been a nice experience. Don't you agree?
Yeah, it has.
Yes, we're very fortunate to have her to tell us, and isn't she a fantastic storyteller?
Yeah. So,
And we have to go home now, so I guess we'll have to say cheerio.
cheerio. Cheers.
You're going on up to Canada,
Yes.
and we're going back home.
Okay.
We're going to go see Charlie.
All right.